sample taken by Travis Audacity. Hey, pretty sure they don't really know what he's talking about.
I'm Laura London, and this is a special quarantine edition of Speaking of Jung. Joining us for the 14th episode in this series is Professor Diana Walsh Pasulka. After completing her undergraduate work at the University of California, Davis, she earned a master's degree in Systematic Theology from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, and later went on to receive a doctorate in religious studies from Syracuse University. Currently, she is a professor of religious studies and chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religion at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Dr. Pasulka specializes in Catholic history, and her current research focuses on religious and supernatural belief and practice and its connections to digital technologies and environments. Her lectures include Taking UFOs Seriously, that is, religiously, The Belief Effect of Media on Religion, and The Fairy Tale is True, Social Technologies and Belief in the Supernatural. Along with her colleague, fellow religious studies professor Jeffrey Kripal, Dr. Pasulka co-organized the conferences Emergent Technologies and New Mythologies for the Institute of Noetic Sciences and Bodies of Light and Super Saints for the Esalen Center for Theory and Research. She served as head religion advisor for the films The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2, and has received numerous grants and awards for research and applied learning, including some from the Esalen Center in 2016 for research at Castel Gandolfo's Vatican Observatory, and in 2018 for ongoing research involving the Vatican and the Vatican Archives. Her two books, published by Oxford University Press, are Heaven Can Wait, Purgatory in Catholic Devotional and Popular Culture, and American Cosmic, UFOs Religion Technology. She is also co-editor of Posthumanism, The Future of Homo Sapiens, which includes her chapters The Prehistory of the Posthuman and The Spectrum of Human Technohybridity, The Total Recall Effect, and of the newly released Believing in Bits, New Media and the Supernatural, which includes her chapter Where Soul Meets Technology, Catholic Visionaries and the Stanford Research Institute as Precedents for Human-Machine Interfaces and Social Telepathy Apps, co-written with David Metcalf. Her book, American Cosmic, crossed from an academic to a mainstream audience and became a bestseller in several genres. It has been optioned by Chad and Carrie Hayes of the Conjuring franchise and is being developed for television. Dr. Pasulka is asked weekly to appear on the History Channel, A&E, and other media platforms, and has lectured at the Guggenheim Museum, Harvard University, and the Commonwealth Club in Silicon Valley. Please visit the website speakingofjung.com, where you will find links to everything discussed in this episode in the show notes. This interview is being recorded on Wednesday, March 17th, 2021, through the magic of Zoom. Hi, Dr. Pasulka.
Hi. Thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, thank you so much for your time and for joining us here today. We have so much to cover. I've been listening to your interviews. You've been kind of doing podcasts and other interviews since around 2018. I will provide links to all of those on the episode page because you have been on podcasts hosted by friends of mine, Miguel Connor's Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio and Gordon White's Rune Soup and Whitley Strieber's Dreamland and a whole host of others. You did a 3-hour video interview with Lex Friedman, so I will provide links to all of those in the show notes. But first of all, we both mentioned that we would like to recognize that today is St. Patrick's Day. And I was wondering if you would tell us a little bit about, since you are a professor of the history of religions, and how does St. Patrick even figure into that?
My book, Heaven Can Wait, was basically the first 3 chapters were about purgatory and how purgatory was associated with caves, purgatorial caves. And one of the most famous of these caves is in Ireland, on this lake. It's called Lough Derg, and it's on this island in Lough Derg. And so this was a medieval practice of Catholics, European Catholics. They would purgate, right? They would do their purgatorial rites in these caves, which, by the way, when you went into them, you had to stay in there for 24 hours. So you were locked in this cave for 24 hours. And there could be demons and angels and things like that in these caves. And if you were alive the next day, your sins were, you were free from sin. So this was a practice. And so this cave was in Ireland. So I spent the first 3 chapters of that book in Ireland, basically talking about, how this developed in Ireland. And it was prior to Dante's Purgatorio, his Inferno and Purgatorio and the Divine Comedy. And there was a very famous, I would call it a medieval bestseller, called St. Patrick's Purgatory, about this knight who goes into the cave and the kinds of things that he has to endure in order to survive the 24 hours, fighting demons, seeing souls in purgatory, being, hurt, and this kind of thing. So it was really a mixture of physical and what we would consider matter and spirit, as, if we use that dichotomy, which I don't like to do, but for want of a better framework, those were enmeshed in this cave in purgatory. So here we're doing this interview on St. Patrick's holy day.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that the last chapter where I discussed this cave, on the last page, I finish with the Catholic Church is upset that this cave, allows people to, take control of their own fate, basically their own afterlife fate. So they go to Lough Derg, and they fill in the cave. So people can no longer, and they do this on St. Patrick's Day in, I think it's 1497. Okay. So they're doing this on St. Patrick's Day. And, that's not very nice. But what's actually quite funny is that the people of the loch, the people of the lake, and the community of Lough Derg, they actually, when the Catholic officials came to fill in the cave, they actually had a false cave there for them to fill in. And so when they left, they just reopened the real cave.
And what is the association with St. Patrick?
Okay, so St. Patrick is said to have put his staff on the ground. It was a legend that St. Patrick was supposed to have opened the cave with basically his staff and prayers to allow people to basically go through this, so they could become, they can atone for their sins. That's why he did that.
That's why he did that. And so this practice of going into a cave, this purgatory cave, was for sinners. It sounds like a severe form of when we would go to confession as a child, because I'd like to mention to the listeners that I was raised Catholic, and so was Dr. Pasulka. So we both have Catholic background. There is this, so in the Catholic religion, is going to confession, that is one of the, I forgot what the word is.
It's a sacrament.
Sacrament of confession. And so it was a private, you go into a private little room and you confess your sins to a priest, and then the priest would give you penance. Is that the right word?
The priest basically, in a prayer to God, you confess your sins to the priest. The priest is a stand-in there And through that process, your sins are forgiven.
But
by God, not by the priest, but by God through the mediation of the priest.
And then the priest would give us, say, you need to say so many Hail Marys, so many Our Fathers, and that was kind of what, so we would leave the confessional and then we'd go sit in a pew and we would recite those prayers. And that was our our punishment or our penance. I don't know if I'm saying the right word, but now you're saying that these caves, to me, it sounds like maybe a more severe form of that. You go into these caves, right?
Definitely, yes.
And I never knew that those caves existed, because when I was growing up, I was taught that there was heaven, there was hell, and there was purgatory. And purgatory was if you weren't good enough to get into heaven and you weren't bad enough to go into hell, you kind of had to hang out in purgatory. But I think I was told that it would last forever, that it was infinite.
Oh, that's not correct.
But they're not practicing that anymore in Catholicism, from what I understand, that was abolished with Vatican II. But my curiosity and what I'd like to ask you about with these caves is, when was that done and why was that stopped, and was that effective?
Yes. Okay. So that's basically the working argument of my book, Heaven Can Wait. Mm-hmm. And actually what was surprising to me, because I was as surprised to find purgatorial caves as anyone else, right?
Okay.
I was looking for this kind of abstract doctrine, but the further I went back, the more material it became, the more, place-centered it became. Mm. And I guess that was, I know that was a problem as the Catholic Church philosophers and theologians begin to think about, are souls material things, or, what constitutes this thing we call the afterlife and purgatory and things like that. So, and it's a messy deal here with purgatory. So these caves seem to have been around in the early medieval time period on through until around the early modern period, which is, around 1500. Okay. So they were, so people practiced this. Now, you did have to be pretty terrible to have to be sent to these caves, or to mm-hmm. want to go to these caves. Like, you probably killed somebody or did something pretty bad.
Okay.
So it wasn't a penance for everyone. And it's called a penance, by the way, when you do those things, those Hail Marys, and, in order to atone for whatever sin you committed, mm-hmm. that's called a penance. And mm-hmm. and when you do go through, by the way, the purgatory is actually still a doctrine of the Catholic Church.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, it is actually. But limbo isn't. So I think that a lot of people were confused because Pope Benedict in 2007 eradicated the idea of limbo, which had been around also like purgatory for about 1,000 years or more, or even longer than that, in the Catholic Church. And that was on the edge. It's from the Latin limbus, and it's either on the edge of heaven or it's on the edge of hell, depending on which theologian you look at. And it was a very confusing doctrine back then too. Not an official doctrine, but a belief. And so the destination for souls who went to limbo, this destination limbo, what kind of souls would go there? So Socrates would probably be in limbo, virtuous pagans, and then babies who weren't baptized. So it caused a lot of pain and suffering for parents who believed that when they die, they most likely eventually would get into heaven, but their child would remain, if it was unbaptized, and mm-hmm. died, would remain mm-hmm. in limbo. So, he kind of just abolished limbo in 2007. And a lot of people, because they're confused about purgatory, they didn't know what it was, or, since Vatican II, people didn't practice the purgatorial prayers for their for souls and things like that, which they did for so long. And then all of a sudden, boom, it's gone. So I also wondered, why is it gone? And that's what sent me back pretty much 800 years to, look at where this idea came from, what happened. And it was around for a long time, but the actual word purgatory wasn't actually in Catholic documents until the 13th century.
So then what does this say about the Catholic belief in the afterlife?
Oh, it says that it is a changing belief. It changes, obviously.
Okay.
People used to believe in limbo, and now people don't believe in limbo. So popes used to talk about limbo. Pope Benedict eradicated limbo. Mm-hmm. So that's what it says about beliefs. But beliefs, of course, change and could be wrong. Does it mean anything about the reality of those places? Not necessarily. I mean, if those places, as a professor, I would say, if those places exist, then they exist. How we believe in them could be we could have imperfect beliefs about them, like we do about a lot of things, like the flat earth, right? Well, it's not flat, but a lot of people believed that, and still do actually believe that it is. And in my opinion, that's an incorrect belief. It doesn't conform to the reality.
So where are we with purgatory? And I guess as a child, because I went to catechism, I didn't go to Catholic school, but my mom did. And I haven't been practicing as a Catholic. My interest has been reignited, and mostly because of your work. And I'm now wondering what it was I was taught as a child, limbo or purgatory.
So purgatory is it's still a doctrine of the Catholic Church, and it is this place that the soul goes before it actually enters heaven, because it's not good enough to get into heaven.
So you can go from purgatory to heaven?
Oh, absolutely. Purgatory is not eternal.
But limbo is?
Yes, limbo
was.
Would be... Yeah, it was. But it doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't exist anymore. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we could move on. So what I've been wanting to talk to you about, because maybe not all of the listeners, but some of the listeners know that I have been involved in the UFO community since, the 1980s, when I lived in Cleveland, Ohio, and Cleveland has the oldest continuously meeting UFO group in the country.
Wow.
The Cleveland Ufology Project, yes. We would drive over to the west side of Cleveland once a month for meetings. I think I started going back in 1987. So I've been wanting to talk to you about how the UFO phenomenon, maybe the existence of non-human life elsewhere, I mean, whether it be physical, perhaps this Perseverance rover that recently landed on Mars could find anything from microbes or to the ruins of an ancient civilization, or non-physical, how it's affected our stance on religion. I'd like to discuss how the potential proof of non-human intelligent life elsewhere, which a lot of people are expecting that to come any day now, government disclosure, but how that proof, if it comes to light, will affect the world's religions.
Yes, that's a great question. And it's a question that the Vatican asks as well. They have conferences that, that's the main question. And they consider, what effects it might have on people's religious beliefs.
Yeah.
And my friend Jeff Kripal and we've actually talked a lot about this, and he thinks it's going to devastate, it happens, it's going to devastate the kind of fundamental beliefs, religious beliefs, like the traditional religions, that, Hinduism and Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. And I tend to not think that at all, actually. Okay. I do know that within Catholicism, I don't think it's going to affect it at all.
Really?
I think, I think that the Catholic Church is pretty open to things that might be found. And the belief would be that the whole universe is created by the creator God, And therefore, these things are also, if found, are also created by God. So that would be the belief. It would be like a theistic understanding of these non-human intelligent beings. So religions posit non-human intelligent beings, right? So almost all religions, not all, but almost all religions have this idea that there are these kind of beings that are intelligent and they're not us. They could be angels, they could be demons, bodhisattvas, so they're all, religion makes room for these things that rational frameworks don't make room for. And so I think that of all the, belief systems, I think religions would be most adaptable to this idea. And I think that if anything, like atheists, materialist scientists would maybe have more of a learning curve.
Interesting.
If there were to be,
that.
that's what I think. I've talked to so many people who are religious and who do believe also in, UFOs and things like that I think I have a pretty good understanding of how it would go.
My thought when you were explaining that, and you mentioned angels, demons, bodhisattvas, from my experience, they're usually depicted in human form.
Yes, they are.
And we're taught that God made man, at least in Catholicism, God made man in his image. So if we were to encounter, let's say, and I'm always trying to be careful with what word I use, extraterrestrials, aliens, how about non-human intelligent life forms, say in the movie Arrival? Yes. They did not look human.
No.
So being brought up Catholic, learning that God made man in his image, and then I see the alien life form in Arrival, and I'm thinking, did God make that life form too?
Sure. So those are good questions. And I have to take each of I have to break down your question.
Okay.
If that's okay. So I'm going to kind of break it down so that we can look at it and I can give you an adequate answer that I hope you'll be okay with.
Okay.
So the first idea here is that God made man in his image. So one thing that I teach in my courses is we go back to the literal translations of the Hebrew Bible.
Okay.
And the creation. And when you do that, what you see is that the English translations are way off. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we go back to the Hebrew and we see that there are two creation stories back to back in the Bible. And so when we look at each of them, they're a little bit different. And one of them basically, the language is, first of all, God is posited as a plural being. Okay. And so God has created human creatures in God's image. So it takes out gender. Okay. So it kind of eradicates gender. Mm-hmm. It also suggests in that same story of creation that God creates all the things of the world, the universe but it doesn't necessarily say in God's image. Okay. But it does say that God creates those. So then you could posit, okay, so say we find an extraterrestrial, which by the way, we also do a lot of projection onto, we anthropomorphize.
Yes. If
you look at, the Greys or the Nordics and things like that, we also anthropomorphize these beings. So we tend to do that. That's something that we do. We anthropomorphize animals, Blue's Clues. And, if you have kids, you're aware of all this anthropomorphic, kids TV shows and things like that. So it's kind of our tendency to do that. So I would suggest that if you're taking the beings like Arrival, a movie producer has to in some way show an alien being in order to, or maybe not, but in order to create a movie to okay. So what are these things that we are then in contact with if we're in contact with these alien beings? Yes, I think that we do actually anthropomorphize those. And in fact, I'm writing an essay right now about that, the anthropomorphizing of extraterrestrials and aliens and, what we call non-human intelligences. It's my opinion that if they exist, or if we do find non-human intelligence, it's probably already interacting with us. We probably don't recognize it.
Okay.
It's so incredibly alien that we just don't recognize it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't look like what we've been trained to understand it to look like. I mean, all of us alive today have been inundated with media, that tells us what aliens look like.
So me saying that God created man in his image is maybe not an exact translation of the story, right? And it's interesting because I wanted to mention that later when I bring up Jung and how his collected works were translated from German. And some of his detractors nitpick the words that he used. And sometimes I wonder, did he really choose that one word, or is that the word that the translator chose? Because I interviewed the editor and co-translator of the Red Book and the Black Books, Professor Sonu Shamdasani at University College London, and he mentioned that the lead translator of Jung's collected works was kind of different, and that they discovered lots of errors in the translation. So sometimes I wonder about that.
Yes, I mean, I think that's a huge correction that needs to happen. It happens in religious studies departments when we teach basic religious studies. We basically, take, and I do that a lot. I and especially with the work in the what I call these contact events that happen. I go back to the original and I read it in whatever language it is. If that language isn't my own, I surely know somebody in my field who knows that language. So I ask them to help me out. And so we go back and forth and we look at it, and you can see that the biblical translations, when first they were translated from the Greek into Latin, and a lot was lost there. Okay. But then the Latin was translated into different vernacular languages like English and French, and lots was lost there. So we've got, what version, like the second version and the third version translations. And so people lost their original gender. A lot of things happened. There were more apostles, and, there were a lot of things that changed.
Well, going back to my original question about how I'm not saying that disclosure is inevitable, because I sometimes fear that I will die still not knowing the truth, if there is a truth, about the existence of extraterrestrials and their presence here on Earth. And so, as I said, some people think that disclosure is coming any day now. Some people have said in the community that it's currently underway. I just don't know. But I do wonder and worry about how it will be received. And because of the field that I'm involved in Jungian psychology, I don't know if I believe or feel that the general public is ready for it or will accept it, and whether or not it will destroy civilization as we know it. So I thought it was interesting that you mentioned that you thought that Catholicism was open to it, and there are certainly other religions, and I know and have become very close to over the past 10, 11 years, a group of Tibetan Buddhist monks who were on tour here in the United States, and they've since gone back to their monastery in South India. It's actually the Dalai Lama's home monastery in South India. It's Drepung Losling. And I keep in touch with them, and we talk on Skype, and I've often pressed them to tell me what they believe about the existence of extraterrestrials. And, there's a lot about their practice that they won't share with me, despite knowing me, because I'm not a Tibetan Buddhist. I haven't taken those vows, and there's still secrecy, and I totally respect that. But I could see them accepting it and being ready for it. But let's say my sister-in-law or my next door neighbor, no way. I don't believe that we as a society, despite Star Wars and Resident Alien and all of the media we're being fed, I don't think that we could handle it psychologically. And I would love to hear more about your work with technology, because the subtitle of your book is UFOs Religion Technology. So how does technology factor into this?
Sure. So the technologies that I focus on in my book, American Cosmic, are media technologies. Mm-hmm. And what I found in my work while I actually worked on The Conjuring, which is a haunted house movie. Yeah. But what was interesting to me was the processes of, it's about the supernatural, and it's posited on true events, quote unquote. And so I was really interested in this true event side. I've always been interested in how something's, that could be posited as true. And we go into the movie knowing that most likely it's not, yet somehow we come out like not just entertained, but also in certain respects believing, even despite our best efforts.
Wait, so let me just jump in there. So you mean like if we're told ahead of time, this is based on a true story, you still think people go into it thinking that it's not really factual?
Oh, definitely. I think we think it's basically spin, right? Okay. To sell the movie.
Okay.
I think that people, have some they're credulous, and they can say, well, we get manipulated by the media all the time.
Okay.
So there are these, we have deep fakes now, we have technology is basically help blur what used to be called fact from fiction. Mm-hmm. But we live in a different world now where we can't tell the difference. And so, my emphasis on this idea of how visual representations, and especially those accompanied as, given to us as stories and things like that, based on true events, really helps bolster this belief in UFOs. And that's what I was basically saying. I was using this belief system of UFOs, which has different types of beliefs within it, even like different categories within mm-hmm. it. Because people believe in UFOs in a variety of different ways. How I agree with Carl Jung in the sense that this is the creation of a new mythology, a new way of looking at the world, a new religion, really, is what I'm saying in my book. A new form of religion, not a new religion, but because there are UFO religions, but a new form of religion. And it's based on this pervasive use of technology that blurs the distinctions between fact and fiction. So we see a documentary and it's, I'm going to take an example from mm-hmm. that I know of, actually. I know a movie producer named Dean Alioto, and he produced, you probably have seen this, it's Alien Abduction. I think it came out like about 15 years ago or something. And so what he did was
was it a movie or a television program?
It was a short movie basically about an alien abduction.
Okay.
And he wanted to create an alien abduction. Like if an alien abduction happened, what would it look like?
Okay.
So he's a very talented movie producer, and he created it fully, being honest and saying this is just a creation, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not any kind of real alien abduction, of course. Well, it was perceived by audiences as real. And then it went viral, if you could say that, back 15 years ago. It went viral. Jacques Vallée witnessed it, and I remember asking him about it, and he said, oh yeah, this was something that was ironic, and he had witnessed the whole thing. He witnessed the movie producer talking about it, the premiere of it, people actually believing it was real, while the movie producer Dean saying, no, it's not actually real. And then
people think that he filmed a real alien abduction?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
I missed
Yes.
all that. I did not see that.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
And so, even after The Conjuring, I was invited onto Catholic radio, and millions of people were listening, and they were listening because they believed in the accounts of what happened in The Conjuring, and they thought even the movie itself could actually bring the supernatural to life. And so I was being asked on Catholic radio
Mm-hmm.
whether or not the supernatural could, was being brought to life through these types of movies, and whether or not we should actually attend them. Well, I couldn't really answer that because so that's how I focus on media technologies and technology in general. That was a very specific way of looking at it. And I use a lot of cognitive science of, basically cognitive science of film and cognitive science of media to discuss how these kinds of things bypass rational thought, go directly to parts of our brains that then basically believe in these things, so despite us knowing that they're not, say, true.
Just by us knowing that they're not true.
Or maybe even questioning whether or not they're true. Like the Da Vinci Code, for example, right? The Da Vinci Code. Okay, so Jesus being married to Mary and things like that. Well, a lot of my students would then, after that movie was out, come to class and say, no, I believe it. And I said, well, we don't really have any evidence for that. And, I'm not saying he wasn't, but I don't think he was, so we don't have evidence to show that he was. And so without any kind of evidence, though, they were buying into the movie.
My question is always, my first thought is always, who is behind this? What is behind this? There is a they creating this technology.
Oh, I could tell you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So that's what I did during The Conjuring, because I had the same question, like, who does this and why? And so my question was synchronistically answered because I had written that one of my first published articles was actually about the Blair Witch Project, which was the found footage, kind of haunting movie. And it was graduate students who did this movie, and they basically knew, they were very self-consciously creating this found footage documentary style film that wasn't true, but they weren't coming out and saying it wasn't true. And I was actually I was targeted, because I was a grad student at the time, by their stealth advertising campaign, which basically they weren't advertising in the traditional ways. They were actually going through email and things like that. This is kind of before the iPhone was big. And so, friends of mine and my friends and I would get these emails, and we would just be like, what's this? We got to see this. And there were lines. We had to wait in lines to get tickets. In fact, we didn't get tickets the first day that the movie was out. It was tested in, I lived in California, so it was tested in Berkeley. And, and we were the audience, these grad students. So they targeted us, and there we were all lining up to go see it. And so this found footage and this idea of this edge of reality, is it real? Is it not real? They weren't, the directors and producers and creators of the movie weren't coming out and saying it was true or it was not true. And that movie it was a small budget, and it made millions and millions of dollars. And so what happened was I then thought of that, okay, let's tease out the strategies and techniques that they use in order to create this type of belief. Okay. So I did that in the first in that first essay. And then after that, I still had questions, and I knew that I could get deeper. And then I was asked, I got a phone call, and we have a movie production studio here. It's called Hollywood East, actually, where I live. Mm-hmm. And so we have a movie studio, and they weren't telling me a lot, but they said, we need someone who can help us with the Latin for this text. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go on set. They need someone who can help them with Latin. This is a film about exorcism. I'm going to do it. And I know why I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because I'm going to learn what they're doing and mm-hmm. why. Mm-hmm. And so it's all about, for Hollywood, it's all about money. So if they can, and they're very explicit about it. So my next article, called "The Fairy Tale is True," is basically recounting what I learned through that experience. And I use a lot of scholarship to kind of, in media studies, like Jeffrey Sachs wrote a great book. I think it's called Your Brain on Movies. And it's great because basically he also teased out the very specific techniques that are being used in order to create these types of like fake documentaries, because mm-hmm. The genre of the documentary is that it is it documents something that's real, right? Mm-hmm. But what if it doesn't? And then how does that change our belief, or how does that mess with our beliefs? Is that what I should say? Because it does. And so I give a lot of examples of that in my book, and in that article it talks about how movie producers then go through, I think they go to UC Irvine that has a department now, I could be wrong, so but I believe that's where it's at, where they actually do testing of audiences. And what they do is they hook up the audience's brains to these like EKG devices, and they determine which, which scenes produce the most arousal in the brain. Mm-hmm. Okay. And they keep those scenes. Okay. So it's kind of this editing process with using this type of, research. And so when we go to a movie now, or when we see a video game, or when we consume media, I mean, our brains are being completely, aroused in various different ways, dopamine and this and that. And so, so that's what I learned. And it has to do with selling movies and selling products. So it's not necessarily nefarious. It becomes nefarious, but it's not like, I do think that it's actually used today nefariously. But the movie producers are probably the ones who started it, and they only were trying to make a lot of money.
A few things. You mentioned 2 of your articles, and I just want to tell the listeners that all of your papers are available online to download in PDF form. I will have links to Dr. Pasulka's academia.edu page in the show notes for this episode. And secondly, I was a psychology major in college at the University of Washington, and I studied experimental psychology before I switched majors to neuropsychology, and I transferred to a small Jesuit university in Cleveland called John Carroll University. But I then worked at University Hospitals of Cleveland, and I worked in nuclear medicine, where we did PET scans of brains. So I'm familiar with all of that, and I made a conscious decision to leave that field. I didn't like the exclusion of the things that I talk about on this podcast. But what I'm still wondering, and you did a great job of explaining what's going on there, and you say that the motivation is money, but I'm still wondering, what would possess someone to want to do that and create that? I don't understand what's happening psychologically, the motivation to do that. And you mentioned a new form of religion, and I don't want to skip over that because I find that really interesting. And it goes back to my initial question of how would proof of extraterrestrial or non-human intelligent life, how would that affect our religious beliefs? But you're talking about a new form of religion, and that being, and UFOs being a new form of religion. And I guess I don't understand how that would be or could be a religion. So let's talk about, with you being a religious studies professor, what is a religion?
Yes. Okay. I was just about to say, then let's discuss the category of religion. One of the mistakes that we make here in the West is we tend to also think that religions look like what we practiced as kids, right? Mm-hmm. So they look like these monotheistic Western religions of Judaism, Islam, Christianity. Yep. And so we tend to assume that they have these elements to them, like they have a God and they have, these afterlife places, and we are called to do good works and these kinds of things. Okay. Well, okay. That's one category of religion, but it doesn't encompass what religion is, because then you have Tibetan Buddhism or Zen Buddhism, which definitely doesn't posit a God, and, doesn't actually think that, it posits non-reality, which is sunyata and things like this. So, how are then those religions? So those are questions that help us understand that religion is a category that we use as in order to identify how cultures determine what's most valuable to them and what they believe, how we should conduct our lives and things like that. So I generally use John Livingston's definition of religion, which is it's an excellent definition, because it allows us then to say, okay, well, we can't say, oh, Buddhism's not a religion, it doesn't have a God, things like that, right? Mm-hmm. So people tend to think of religions in certain ways. And I'd like to tell your audience, which probably already knows this, because I assume that people that are listening to a podcast on Jung, that would already have thought about this. But the general population, students I get into my classes, they have ideas about religion that are already formed. And I have to break those down, okay? Mm-hmm. So I break those down by using examples like, okay, there is a religion called Jediism, and it's actually a religion of a fiction. It's a religion of Star Wars, okay? And people actually, this is a religion, okay? People practice it. I've met people who are Jedis, and, they take their religion very seriously. So then we ask in the class, is it a religion? Does it conform to these kinds of things? And what is religion, if that can be a religion, if things based on fiction can be a religion? So what is religion? So this is what I like to define religion as. The beliefs and practices directed toward that which a person perceives to be of transformative nature or transformative value. So like ultimate and transformative value. Okay. So you can take then Buddhism and say that's a religion, because for want of a better word, the goal of Buddhism is what? To be awake, is to wake up, right? To the reality of our conditionedness, right? Our programmedness, and then to be awake to that. So we can then say that is the ultimate transformative, that the value is to be awake, and the transformation is doing, the noble truths, is doing the practices, the Eightfold Path and the noble truths. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if then that's religion, how do we have this? Religions are determined a lot by infrastructure. And when I say that, let's go back to Purgatory. Okay, so that doctrine was created by this practice of people going into places, these caves, okay? And so what is that but an infrastructure, right? Okay. So that's a material reality. So in the 90s, when I was a grad student and in the Bay Area, I was surrounded by the changing technologies, right? And the dot-com boom and that kind of thing. And I was like, wow, it was really easy to get a job doing any kind of technology and we could make a lot of money doing that. And I realized that technology was the game changer here. It was changing our infrastructure. In California, it was very obvious. So it's now been imported all over the world. And not just that, but COVID has forced us to all be in, look at us right now, right? We're talking to your audience through our phone or through our computer, through these screens.
Mm-hmm.
So screen culture now dominates. Okay, if screen culture dominates, how is that going to impact religion? Well, it's creating this new form of religion, because the UFO is not just a representative of technology. It is technology to a lot of people. It's called advanced technology,
mm-hmm.
right? And so a lot of scientists believe in it. There's also this potential realism to it. I mean, NASA every 2 years or so, basically, the chief scientist will do a press release and say, we will find life, it will be soon. We have the technology, we have, and so, so there's a realism there for this non-human life elsewhere that religions tend to have. Religions tend to have this belief, people believe in Jesus and that he is the Son of God. They believe that. People believe that Muhammad is the prophet, that kind of thing, right? So there are these beliefs in these claims are not just claims, but they're truth claims. And so the UFO, quote unquote, type of religiosity is what I call it, is this new form of non-human life that we then associate with lots of different things like, advanced technologies and things like that. Perhaps they're good, perhaps they're bad. We don't know, because, we tend to do that to our non-human intelligences in other religions too. We say, oh, demons are bad, angels are good, kind of thing. We make those same projections. So here we are in, the 21st century. We have a new infrastructure. We have a new material reality, and it's virtual. Well, what are our beliefs? And how do they? So the UFO belief is also one that can actually accompany a religious belief. I know lots of people who are religious, but also believe in non-human intelligent extraterrestrial life.
You say in the book that religions work because practitioners believe in their truth or truths, even without overt evidence to support them. Religious truth, practitioners point out, exists independent of belief or disbelief.
Yes, they do believe that.
I'm not fully understanding how UFOs could be considered a religion, because to me, I don't know. I just don't liken the two at all. And I'm very interested now in Jeffrey Kripal. I know that Whitley Strieber has had him on Dreamland many times. I have heard interviews with him. I don't recall him saying that and you say he still believes that if UFOs are deemed to be real and that we are being visited by non-human intelligence, that it would disrupt our world.
It would disrupt religious belief, definitely. Yeah, he thinks that. I mean, if we can look at the Nation of Islam. So this is a religion that was founded by a person who had an experience of what he called a mothership, which was a UFO. So there are many religions that emerge from these events, that people seeing UFOs, and then people, they're called UFO religions. So what I'm saying is now we're moving on from the UFO religion to a form of belief that is religious-like, because people become, it determines their worldviews, right? It determines what they believe in humanity as like part of this cosmos, and, or what is our place within the universe and things like that. So it really changes their perspective, which religions do. They're meant to kind of frame our perspective of the cosmos, right? And our cosmology. And so that definitely happens with people who experience events, UFO events.
I'm still very interested in the way that UFOs are perceived by the general public. I can only speak about here in the United States because that's where I am. And for me, it's been part of my world for so long. And as everyone knows, and there's been such a proliferation of movies and television shows. And even during the Super Bowl, this couple months ago, there were so many commercials that included aliens and UFOs. I mean, one right after another. So it's definitely part of our culture. But whenever I mention UFOs on this podcast or in my social media, I'm on social media to promote this podcast. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And it just doesn't, those posts, that content just doesn't seem to get the amount of attention that the non-UFO posts get. And I still wonder, are UFOs still kind of ridiculed or looked down on? So I'm curious as to what your experience has been in the world of academia since publishing this book, American Cosmic, UFOs Religion Technology.
Okay, so so the question is, how are UFOs perceived today? They were definitely stigmatized, absolutely, of course. On purpose. There were programs, governmental programs that purposely set out to debunk UFO accounts by citizens of the United States. This is just fact. Okay. So it was a successful program. However, what's happening now?
Yeah.
Okay. So knowing that this is the case, knowing that it could ding my credibility as a professor, but actually not caring at this point, I went ahead and decided to write this book. I was very surprised by what I found. I didn't expect to find what I found, but I'm happy I did. But I also decided and strategized that it would have to be published by a pretty well-known academic press,
right,
in order to keep it on the up and up, right? And credible, which I did. And I went with Oxford because I've been publishing with them and they're great. Okay. So what happened then afterwards? Well, first off, I think I opened my book by stating that people have stigmatized this, but I've not met in my research more credible, credentialed, and successful people than I have in this research. And I just had to say that right off the bat, because that's absolutely the truth. So as soon as I begin the research, like almost immediately, my research territory changed. So generally my research territory would be, people who are religious and, theologians and, other people in religious studies,
right,
kind of things that I deem to be appropriate to my work. Well, my work changed significantly, and it wasn't just people who said they had experienced UFO events that came into my sphere, but people who were associated with the government and people who were highly credentialed people, wealthy people, billionaires. I've never met so many billionaires in my life. They all want to reverse engineer what they think is alien technology. So, and they have the means to perhaps do that if there is alien technology. So, so that was shocking to me. But also I think that, I said it in the book, I said, this is the case. Now, after saying that, I was invited to a lot of prestigious institutions to give talks. So I think that a lot of people are taking it very seriously.
That's what I would imagine. And that's why I am always surprised at what did you use the word stigmatized?
Yes.
UFOs? That's still happening. And I think still after all this time, and then Robert Bigelow coming out on 60 Minutes talking about, I don't care what people think of my admission for what I believe or what I know to be true. So, and as you mentioned, these are millionaires and billionaires. And it's like, I studied astrology formally for many years. And the saying in the field is that millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do. Right? So the fact that UFOs are still stigmatized and it still makes people uncomfortable is is very surprising to me and very disappointing. And so I want to commend you for writing this book and for being so open and so honest about it, and for getting into everything that you get into in this book. It's a wonderful book. It's fascinating. And I would like to continue to mention some of the main themes here. And I'm probably going to be jumping around because my notes are a bit of a mess. But you do talk about synchronicity in this book. And that has been a very large area of confusion, I will say, in not only the field of Jungian psychology, because I've had many Jungian analysts tell me that it is a very difficult concept. It's difficult to understand, and Jung's essay on synchronicity, it's titled On Synchronicity, is difficult to understand. And to me, I think that where the difficulty comes in is in if you don't take into account Jung's relationship with Wolfgang Pauli and the work that they did together, then you'll never understand synchronicity. But Dr. Pasulka, you in the book give what I think is a great definition of synchronicity. And you say synchronicity, as defined by Carl Jung, is the coming together of inner and outer events that are not causally linked, but are very meaningful to those who have the experience. And I'd like for you to tell us what you were told about synchronicity, because I've not heard any Jungian analysts mention this before. You call it synchronicity fatigue.
Yes.
Please, I love this part of the book. Please tell us what you mean by that.
Okay. When this is how I think of it now, I hope that's okay, because my ideas change over time.
Yeah.
And I experienced synchronicity fatigue a few times in my life. And during each time, it was a time of either intense research or intense meditation and prayer or something like that, right? Okay. And so what I remember experiencing it in my 20s, and it was in college, and I felt that there were so many things that were coincidences, right? I didn't know about synchronicity at that time. There were so many things that were coincidences that were happening like rapid fire, one after the other. And it almost seemed as my experience of it was that the universe was speaking to me in events and through people, and people probably weren't even aware of it. And it was pretty disconcerting. And so I decided I would stop doing the prayer and meditation. And so I did, and the synchronicities and those coincidences faded out. And I went back into, So I had that experience as a younger person. And then I went into graduate school and I read about these things, synchronicities and things like that. And then during this research, synchronicities were happening again, so rapid fire.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That I and thankfully though, I had friends to whom this was happening as well. Mm-hmm. So I had in Buddhism, you call it the community, right? The Sangha community.
Yeah.
And I realized then that you actually need a community of like-minded people in order to do this type of work, because when you start to take away your perceptions of what the world is about and you start to actually experience what the world is, that these kinds of events, the inner meeting the outer, happen all the time.
Yeah.
And that if you're committed to the former reality in which you lived, it could throw you off, right? And so you need people around you. And so I remember being at one of these conferences at Esalen, and I just admitted, I said, I'm having synchronicity fatigue. And that's the first time I said it, right? And everybody laughed, just like you just laughed. Yeah. They said, we understand.
Right.
And because they were having it too. So once we got that over with, I have a friend, Sister Rose. She's a Catholic sister. She's an Ursuline sister. And I've worked with her for about 15 years now. And so she lives in that world of synchronicity. She doesn't live in my kind of, world where I have a foot in both worlds, right?
Right.
So
right.
Sometimes I tell her something and I say, look at this, sister, is this not strange? And she says, no, Diana, that's not how you should look at it. It's actually the other way that's strange, And so I have a lot more of an understanding experientially, I guess you could call it, now about synchronicity than I had prior to first writing this book. But yeah.
Yeah. And in the book, you mentioned that synchronicity unveils something about reality that we need to understand. It is the way our reality is structured. And it goes on I believe it goes on all the time, but we just don't notice it. Jung believed he didn't think mind and matter were fundamentally two separate things. And he talks about the psychoid archetype, and the word psychoid means psyche-like. It was his attempt to say if you follow the psyche all the way down, that the psyche is influencing the material world and vice versa. And that matter has some psychological-like properties, and the psyche actually has substance in the world. And that is where the inner and the outer come into play and are necessary for the technical word synchronicity. And I had a blogger, actually, he got so upset with me. I did an episode with Mike Cleland, who is actually a mutual friend of ours. He's how you and I connected.
He's the synchronicity guy.
He is the synchronicity guy. So Mike Cleland invited me to do an episode of his podcast, The Unseen. And then I asked him to do a quarantine edition of Speaking of Jung, like we're doing right now. And I knew that Mike had a lot of material that he wanted to go into. And so I invited a Jungian analyst here in Chicago to join us, Dr. Kenneth James, who's also a professor. And we looked at synchronicity, Jung's original concept of it. And Dr. James pointed out how synchronicity is not always used correctly in the everyday vernacular. And this blogger listened to that episode we did and got so upset and so offended that he didn't want to be told that he was using the word incorrectly and that we were assholes. And just, I was kind of stunned. I guess not everybody is interested in the facts and in the sources. And so it's used, the term is used kind of incorrectly out there. But I love how in American Cosmic, it's actually on page 111, you say that synchronicity is not such a big deal. And in fact, if you're doing things correctly, I think maybe somebody told you this, if you're doing things correctly, it is how the world functions. And then you quote Jung, saying that synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those with eyes to see.
Yes.
So that, again, is in Dr. Pasulka's book, American Cosmic, on page 111. And speaking of synchronicity, I wanted to mention something else to you on this show because you talk about the movie 2001 in the book, and I think the biggest synchronicity of my life happened involving the movie 2001.
Wow, that's great. That's such a great movie to have a synchronicity about.
Well, that movie, I have to say, because I was, as much as I'm interested in Jungian psychology and in the UFO community, I was trained as a scientist. And you talk about having a foot in both worlds. I still, my initial reaction is always to look at things concretely as opposed to symbolically. So that movie 2001 was, I just recently rewatched it, but that is a very difficult movie for me to understand. What happened was Jung, I'm sure you've heard of the Red Book.
Yes.
Jung's Red Book. So that was released in 2009. And it was followed up by the Black Books, which were just released in October of last year. And the editor Professor Sonu Shamdasani, who I mentioned earlier over at University College London, he agreed to do an episode of Speaking of Jung with me. He edited the Red Book and he co-translated. Well, the Red Book was written by Jung. It was taken from Jung's Black Books. He had a 6-volume set of these black leather-bound books that were where he recorded his dreams and his visions and his active imaginations. And then the Red Book was taken from Jung did it himself, took entries from the Black Books and wrote them in calligraphy in the Red Book and painted these beautiful paintings that he did. He's an artist. So anyway, the Red Book was a huge success, and the foundation decided to publish the Black Books as a 7-volume slipcase edition, this set. So when I was preparing to do the episode with Professor Shamdasani, we were exchanging emails, and they had just finally released a photo of the set of books. And it's a very tall black material. It's covered with like a black linen, and all of the book covers, they're hardcover books that are black linen and gold lettering. And he told me that in the email exchange that he envisioned the monolith from 2001. And I was stunned that he would reference that. I mean, he's a scholar, he's a professor of Jung history.
I just had to pause there for a minute because I was so shocked. That's so shocking.
You and me both. And I just was absolutely stunned that, and also we don't know each other. I had interviewed a woman, Ann Casement, who's very good friends with him. And so she actually probably talked him into doing my show. And for him to, I hope he doesn't mind me telling this story, for him to, I've been telling it, for him to admit that to me, somebody doesn't even know, in email. Well, that sparked this whole big thing. So that was in the very beginning of October last year. He mentions the monolith in 2001. So of course I take off with that. And I have posted lots of photos of the Black Books on social media. And now, of course, I'm seeing monolith everywhere. What happened about a month later in November, that monolith showed up in the Utah desert. Did you hear about those?
I did, yes. I was totally following the whole thing. I thought it was hilarious.
I still don't know. I don't think we still know the source. I know that an art group from New Mexico claimed ownership, but that was debunked from what I understand.
Wow.
But what happened was, so I took off with this theme, and I found on YouTube, which then I later heard you mention, this, now his name escapes me, the gentleman on YouTube that explained.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I think his name is Ayer, Ayer or Ajer.
Okay.
And his website is collative, however you want to pronounce it, learning. And he does film analyses. Is that the person?
Yes.
Yeah. He's got excellent film analyses.
I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes, but I heard you mention that because when you had agreed to do this episode with me, what I do to prepare for a guest is I listen to all the other interviews that I can find that they've done. And I heard you mention that, and I was stunned because I thought, she listened to that too. And you tell people what he said and what you say the monolith is.
Yes. So he, of course, his analysis is that it's the screen. And actually, since I've been doing the podcasts after the American Cosmic came out, people have actually said that he wasn't the first. I guess there were some other people who identified it as the screen as well. But I didn't find them. So I cited him and his work. But I thought his analysis was excellent, that it's basically like the iPhone is the screen, and that he makes an excellent case for it. So I believe him. However, I also believe that it's also, he doesn't go the alien tech way.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't believe in that. But it's not mutually exclusive. Like, you can believe it's the screen and alien tech.
Okay.
Because right now, I think that if there is anything alien, it involves this technology that we're using.
I think so too. And so what I likened it to, and I'm just looking at my iPhone right now, because you know how the iPhones come in different colors. I always get black. Well, I love black. I only wear black actually, but I always get the plus. So it's very large. I always get it in black, and then I have it in a black case. So it looks...
You have a little monolith that you carry around.
Exactly. And then I also have 2 iPads. They're both black in black cases. And then I recently got, my sister-in-law she kept saying, you've got to get a Keurig. You've got to get a Keurig. I don't want a Keurig. I like to do the pour over when I make coffee. And that's another thing we probably won't get to, Italian coffee. There is nothing, nothing better. I will fly to Rome just because I'm craving Italian coffee. I think it's also the cream.
It's amazing. It's just amazing. I was so disappointed in coffee. I was depressed when I got back to the United States.
You can't duplicate it. No. So it's kind of like New York pizza.
I know. Oh.
Anyway, so back to the monolith. So I have no idea where I was going with that. The iPads, the iPhone.
Your sister-in-law.
My sister-in-law said, get a Keurig, thank you. And so I thought, well, I don't have a lot of room on my counter. So I get the single serve slim, of course, in black. I was looking at it the other day and I thought, there's another monolith. It looks like the monolith. So about, as I said, about a month after the Black Books were released on October 13th, 2020, in November of 2020, the first monolith showed up in Utah. And so I was on Richard C. Hoagland's weekend late night radio show, The Other Side of Midnight. He just went nuts. He was all over that. And then another monolith showed up and another monolith showed up. Do you know, do you have any inside information on the source of those?
No, I don't. But I think that I just don't know. I know, okay, when they showed up, I thought it was a great joke, right? I was like, this is just wonderful. Because it's, in a sense, it's happening at the same time as COVID. So it happens when we become absolutely forced to be in the screen. Yes. There's no coincidence there. I mean, maybe it is a coincidence, but it shouldn't be. It should, let's put it this way. It seems pretty strange. Because
the timing of it.
Yeah, the timing of it. I mean, here I have been saying to friends, colleagues, students, who listen, hey, the COVID is actually our initiation into absolutely on a global scale, the infrastructure, the alien infrastructure. And, here we are, accessing everything through the monolith, basically. Right. And then we get these monoliths as a joke, almost saying, haha, we got you, kind of thing. That's how I viewed it. But I know other people just view it as kind of random.
Oh, gosh, I don't think it could be random. So Professor Shamdasani he's an historian who looks at how psychologies are formed. And he said that the Black Books, this 7-volume slipcase set, are a window into Jung's creative process. They show how a psychology was born. And so I thought that was very interesting and very relevant. Because you say that, and then you do talk about the monolith in American Cosmic on page 117. And you're talking about James. You said, according to James, a fan of science fiction and of the original book by Arthur C. Clarke, on which the movie 2001 was based, the monolith is a donation, supposedly from a more advanced species, but its meaning remains mysterious. And that is something else that I don't want to forget to talk about while I have you here, is the strategy, you call it, of not concluding. Not concluding, yes, but understanding. And that is so important. I was wondering if you would say a few words about that.
I mean, I think that I think that there is a Buddhist meditation or exercise in which you say, who am I, right? And then you keep asking and you say, well, am I this? Am I that? No, no, no. And you keep going and it actually never ends. So you can never actually get to who you are or what you are. Okay. I think that what I found in both Tyler and James in my book, pseudonyms for people who are incredibly intelligent scientists, they would not conclude. In fact, Jacques Vallée does this as well. He doesn't make any of these conclusions. Well, these are extraterrestrials. They're from this planet or something. Let's look at this. But they keep an open mind. But they do research. And the more research they do, the more data they have, and the more they kind of put pieces together, and the bigger the picture becomes, right? They get a bigger picture of it. But the method that guides them, it would be great if they could conclude, but they can't because it's too mysterious. It's the question that, and I always use Martin Heidegger. I know a lot of people don't like him, but I always go back to him because he always brings it back up. He says, philosophy has lost its way. It fails to ask the question, why something rather than nothing? Like, the question of, wow, we're here. How, why? And I think that's kind of a fundamental question in every, in the fields in which we ask the big questions, like, these kinds of the science of material reality or something like that, right? So I think that it's a methodology, and most likely, I admired it in James and Tyler.
Yeah.
I think it's an honest methodology, truthfully.
Yeah. Yep. And you mentioned Martin Heidegger. There always seems to be a connection between episodes, and I don't schedule them on purpose. They just happen naturally. For instance, last week, my guest was the Jungian analyst John Ryan Huell, and we talked about his book on St. Francis. It's called The Ecstasies of St. Francis, and he was looking at the life of Francis from a psychological perspective. He was looking at his narcissism and how he used his narcissism. And I was like, what? St. Francis and narcissism? He used his narcissism as a way of transformation. But the reason why I mention him is because his dissertation, his 400-page dissertation, was on Jung and Martin Heidegger.
That's very interesting. And I also find it super interesting that St. Francis used narcissism as a transformative process. I wish narcissists were able to do that.
Yes. Well, I was very happy that Dr. Huell agreed to talk about that book because it was a smaller book, an older book. It was one of his early works, and he's written some major tomes since then. And I asked him if he would focus on that book for that episode. He's agreed to come back to do other episodes about his other books, but that is episode 82 of Speaking of Jung. That's available to stream or download for free from the website. And I would like to encourage everyone to have a listen. It's very interesting. And we also talked about St. Francis receiving the stigmata. And I wanted to mention this earlier when we were talking about angels, because there is, I've been visiting Santa Fe and New Mexico regularly since the mid-90s. And whenever in Santa Fe, usually stay in the center of town, there is the Cathedral of St. Francis of Assisi, and there is a larger-than-life statue. Have you been there?
No, I haven't been there to see that. I've been in New Mexico, but I haven't been there.
So there are I put a lot of photos. What I do with these episodes of Speaking of Jung, so many listeners asked me to upload them to YouTube, which I don't like to do because this is a podcast. It's just audio. It's not video. So I need to include something. And so I've made, when I upload these episodes to YouTube, I include photos and a photo of my guest and their book covers, and then any images that are related to the episode. So I had found all of the photos that I took back in 2010. I mean, I've been to this cathedral many, many times. I've been to mass there, but I actually took a lot of photos of, there are several statues of St. Francis there. There's a big bronze one in the front, but if you go around to the side, to the right side of the cathedral, there is a big white marble statue of St. Francis showing the stigmata. His palms are up, and you could see the stigmata in his palms. And I've included all the photos I took there in the YouTube, the slideshow that accompanies episode 82. But what did I want to say?
That's cool. I can't wait to see that.
Yeah, and I have close-ups, and then the sun was coming in, and it was shining on it, and it. What did I want to say? The seraphim, the angels. So when I was searching around the web to include some of the artwork that would depict, because the stigmata is not just in the palms of the hands, it's also in the feet and in the side, right?
Yeah, there are different types of stigmata.
Okay.
If you look at it within the Catholic tradition.
Different. And didn't St. Catherine of Siena receive the stigmata too?
Gosh, probably. I don't know. I do know that there's, let's see. Oh gosh. Herbert Thurston is the Jesuit who did, the book is called Amazing or Surprising Mystics.
Okay. And
also he did the physical manifest. Oh, you might like this book, actually. You might like his work. Mm-hmm. It's Herbert Thurston.
Okay.
He did a really great book called the science. What is it called? Gosh, the science of the physical manifestation of mysticism, something along those lines.
Cool.
Yeah, and it's basically looking at mystics and saints who have stigmata and things like that.
I love that. I'm not sure why. I'm still exploring that, because St. Catherine of Siena is entombed in the altar at the Santa Maria sopra Minerva church that's like right behind the Pantheon there in Rome. If you're looking at the Pantheon, over to the right behind it is my favorite church in the world that I've ever been to. And it looks like nothing on the outside. It's just very plain. And you go inside and it's like being in outer space. And I have a photo I'd like to share with you of someone took of me from behind. I'm at one of the side chapels looking at the Annunciation, and my feet are lit up.
Oh, right. I think you did share that with me. I did
send that to you.
That was really interesting.
In the crazy email that I sent you telling you my whole life story. Yeah, so I don't know how I got there, but St. Francis, the stigmata, the seraphim, earlier when we were talking about angels, and I also don't want to neglect to cover this a little bit while I have you here. I noticed this when I was at the Vatican Museum of the things in the sky in these old paintings. Mm-hmm. I know I'm saying that very crudely, but
I think that's probably a good way to say it.
When St. Francis is depicted as receiving this stigmata, it in some of the artwork that I included in the slideshow for episode 82, it is a red seraphim, multi-winged angel that is beaming something down to St. Francis that is causing these wounds, which he later dies from.
Yes.
So why is however he received the stigmata? I mean, we don't know. It's depicted as an angel. It could be a UFO. What's going on there?
Yeah. I think the best thing for us to do is to retract our terms and go back to what you said, this thing in the sky. Okay. So because, there's a lot of connotation that comes with calling it either a UFO or calling it a angel.
Yeah.
Because both of those terms are very specific terms that mean things. The Catholic Church calls it an angel. But if you go back to the earliest sources about it, And actually, I did this when I first started to think about writing about UFOs. I thought, I need to look at some of these weird things that happen in Catholicism, and the original sources, and then the representations of them in art, because the representation doesn't actually look like the original source.
Yeah.
So the original source is so weird that you have to wonder how the artist was able to you read it and you're like, what's that? I actually shared it with Tyler. So, okay, let's put it this way.
Okay.
How does this get done? How does an artist portray an angel? Okay.
Right.
All right. Well, there are conventions, right? Artistic conventions of portrayal, but who did it first, right? That's the question. Who did it first and why?
Mm-hmm.
So you have usually some kind of contact event, like St. Francis's contact with this non-human intelligence that comes through the atmosphere in sparks and lights, and then beams these things that look like rays, right? That, that's what they seem like. And they're somewhat portrayed like that in the textual source. And they hurt him, he's like hurt by these things.
Yeah.
And there seems to be some type of telepathy too that goes on between it and Francis. And then, there's an eye that comes out, right? And then the face, and then it gets retracted again. So, this is something very strange, right? And how are you going to represent that? Well, because it happened to Francis, who wasn't a saint at the time, but it happens to Francis, who's a very well-known Catholic, throughout Italy. Then it gets interpreted. And so it goes through these, levels of interpretation. Okay. I think if that happened today, people would interpret that as a UFO coming down and zapping this holy guy.
Right.
The holy, I guess now that we know he's a narcissist, the holy narcissist of the neighborhood.
Right.
So, that's what, the same thing happens to, not the same thing, but the same process happens if you look at Teresa of Avila and her, what's called the Ecstasy.
Yeah.
And there's the Bernini statue of it. And it doesn't look anything. Yeah. It doesn't look anything like her autobiographical account of what happened to her. So the artistic representations it's like the Bible that gets retranslated. There's a lot of skewing and redaction that goes on.
So was it cleaned up? From her original experience, what happens there?
It looks a lot better than the original experience. Yeah. The Bernini statue looks pretty okay, right? So this little angel looks like, Eros or
Cupid.
Yeah, Cupid. It's kind of a cute little thing. But that's not exactly how in fact, it's not at all how she described it in her autobiography. And then her own editors actually edited a lot of what she said about it. In fact, they edited out that she said it was actually a real thing. Like most of her angel sightings were imaginative in her imagination. They were still real to her, but they were imaginative. Well, she identified this as being real, physically, actually real. Next to her, it was this shiny thing. It was probably about 3 feet tall, and it had this dart-like object that had light on the end of it, and it pierced her with it.
See, now that there's a problem there, that we're not getting the true story, the real deal of what happened. It's being kind of washed.
Oh yeah, that's the basic interpretive process of religions. And that's what I say is happening to the UFO belief too. Because a lot of stuff happens and then it gets, like on Hangar 1, for instance, they take an account from an organization like MUFON, and they change it. So it's not the actual experience that this person experienced. Just it's changed to make it more, more interesting to people, I guess. But it's really a change. Yeah. It is. Yeah, it's an interesting process.
Well, right there again, I wonder, who is this they that's doing the changing? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Who's this they? And why are they stepping in and changing things?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I think that in each case, it could be a different they for different reasons, but altogether, the process is the same. It gets changed.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that perhaps with the UFO event type thing, it's a definite. I mean, if we had the Project Blue Book, what do we have now? We have to have some other way, of shaping this narrative.
And do you think that the government, I'm just curious your opinion, obviously you don't have to answer this. Do you think that they are justified in keeping things secret from the general public?
Okay, that's a good question. Do I think they're justified?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like
honestly.
what I want to say is like, as a U.S. taxpayer, do you feel that you are entitled to know the quote unquote, to know the truth? Because I think even and I haven't even mentioned this because I actually am not a fan of Jung's essay, Flying Saucers, a Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Sky. And that's why you don't hear me talk about it that much. I don't believe, I'm sorry to be interjecting Jung. I just asked you a question. I don't believe Jung is who we should be going to for insight and information into UFOs. I mean, Jung passed away in 1961. So, and he was looking at things psychologically. His ideas were not concrete. They were psychological. He was trained as a psychiatrist. And so I don't tend to look at what Jung said about UFOs, and really hang on his every word. But he did say that in fact, this is a quote, he called it a stupid policy. And he said that the public ought to be told the truth. I'm curious, do you think the public should be told the truth of whatever the government knows?
I mean, that's a hard question for you to answer, because first, I don't know what the truth could be. Like, say, so say, let's assume, there is this government cover up, or I would only imagine that if it is, they're covering it up because it might be disturbing. Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, maybe there is justification for it, but if that's the case, but, I do know that we do have precedent for government cover-ups with respect to UFOs. And there's, if you go back and you look at anything that has to do with our history of space flight and things like that, a lot of things are classified and covered up, and it's just out there. It's just, it's not, they're not trying to say, oh, we're telling you the truth. No, they're not lying. They're saying this is classified. Right. You can't, we don't want to tell you this. It's classified for various reasons. Now, I don't know. I mean, do we have a right to know? I mean, I think that a lot of people already know things, and it depends on your own. I mean, there are a lot of people who have experiences. Since my book was released, I'm inundated with people from all over the world sending me videos and
really,
their experiences, and they're very similar. So, I don't know what it is there, but there's something. Now, is it our own stuff? It might be, or is it not from here? It might be not from here, I guess. I can't conclude. I've done a lot of research, but still don't know. Right. I do have my own beliefs about it, but I tend to keep those off of podcasts.
Sure. That's totally understandable. Yeah.
Because those beliefs could change, right?
Yep.
So with new data, the belief can change.
I wanted to ask you about bilocation and levitation. I ask you that because you mentioned that you were studying those things, and I used to listen to, before I got into Jung, I used to listen to Carolyn Myss, who is an author. She's still out there, and she talked about Padre Pio, bilocating. And I thought, what? And then I never heard anybody mention it after that. And as far as levitation, I'm not surprised by that at all. The cities are practiced. And also, I received TM instruction, Transcendental Meditation, back in 1988. And there was an advanced course after you've been meditating for a while, you could take the TM Cities program, which I never did. And when you're meditating, you do this hopping, this kind of levitating. And so that never surprised me. But in your research on Catholic saints, you studied that. And I was wondering if there was anything you'd like to tell us about that.
Oh, absolutely. So it was by coincidence, actually, that while I was writing and doing the research for American Cosmic, I was asked to go to the Vatican and look at the records, the canonization, which are the trial records for the case of sainthood for Joseph of Cupertino. And he is well known as the levitating saint, right? So when you see him, his iconography shows him kind of flying up in the air. So I did that. And at the same time, I looked at the records for Maria of Agreda, who is said to have bilocated, and they were contemporaries, one in Italy and one in Spain. And so her history, you probably know her history because she has churches and statues and things throughout the Southwest United States. She's called the Lady in Blue. And she was supposed to have bilocated in the 1600s from her cell in Spain to places in the Southwest. And she talked about them and wrote about them. Okay, so these are the alleged things that happen. Now, what's interesting is that they're in UFO, think of the iconography of the UFO. A lot of it is funny. Okay. So a lot of it you see like this UFO coming down and levitating a cow into its ship. Right. I think everybody's seen that, like, meme, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of funny because in UFO, not funny, it's actually true that in a lot of accounts of UFOs, people describe levitation. So it was a very strange co-research agenda that I was finishing American Cosmic while I was at the Vatican studying these two saints that were having these really intense experiences. And Maria said that what she did was that she was riding on the wings of angels to the new world through the sky. And she could look down and see the spinning of the earth. And I thought, that's so interesting. Again, if they lived today, perhaps we would say, they're having abduction experiences or something like that,
Right. So did you come across, I'm curious, any other saints that levitated or bilocated?
I mean, I did look up their records because that's a big deal to do. You have to request those in advance and everything, but there are so many. Again, Herbert Thurston did, please look this up when
I will
afterwards, or I'll look it up and I'll send you a link so that you can post it for your audience. I think your audience in particular would find his work really interesting because he lived in the early 20th century and he was a Jesuit he was a Jesuit priest who was very devout Jesuit, but also interested in psychic things.
Okay.
All things psychic and paranormal.
So
cool. He did a lot of looking into like poltergeists, and he looked at, in fact, his book on poltergeists is so scary that I can't read it. I tried to read it and I was like, this is just too scary.
Yeah, then I won't be able to read it either.
Yeah. It's the nightmare type material stuff.
Okay.
Nightmare material stuff is what I meant to say. So he writes about all the saints that have been said to have levitated, and you can actually look it up on Wikipedia, levitating saints, and they will list all the saints and their the alleged levitations and things like that. Mm-hmm. But Joseph was definitely, I went through his record actually. I was able to digitize it and bring it back to the United States and have it.
Nice.
Yeah, I was able to have it translated, and there's a huge translation project underway with that, in fact.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, the things that are said about him. So one of the things I found when I was there at the Vatican, in the Vatican archive, was I looked at, because I don't actually read that type of Latin well at all.
Okay.
So I could only like look at sections of the book and understand it. So, but I knew what I needed to get so that I could bring it here and have, there aren't a lot of people who do 17th century Italian mixed with Latin. So we had to find people that did and then have them do it. But what I did find, though, and what was very obvious, was that it looked to be about 50 manuscript pages long of people who attested to see him levitate. They basically wrote their names in, in this book, basically this codex or whatnot, not codex, but manuscript, saying, yes, I saw him levitate. Now, this was during the Inquisition. So if you were found to lie,
Right.
it would be very bad. It would go badly for you. So, I mean, there were so many people who came out to say that they saw him levitate. And I actually talked to Father Gumpel, who is a former papal advisor, about the manuscript. And, his interpretation was that it was another time and this belief existed then, but doesn't exist now. But I didn't tell him about UFOs. I couldn't because, I didn't think it was my place to say, what about UFOs, Father?
I wonder if the human ability to levitate was being studied because I would think that I don't know if it's our space agency or our military is probably looking into anti-gravity. I mean, it would be a lot easier for space travel if we had anti-gravity. And what is levitation but bypassing the laws of gravity, right?
Absolutely. In fact, my work on that, the essays that I had published from that type of work, I did have people who were scientists and interested in, different types of propulsion or anti-gravity and things like that. They wanted to read it, which at first I thought was strange, but now I understand.
A connection with bilocation is something that I was trained in, which is remote viewing. And because I like to go straight to the source, I was trained by one of the original viewers in the original unit that was classified at Fort Meade in Maryland. So I'm very familiar with the ability to transcend space and time, or to kind of, I guess, bilocation is more being in two places at once. So our body is sitting at a desk, or in extended remote viewing, lying on the floor with a blindfold and a blanket, and accessing the target. So these are all possible. These all might sound strange to some people, but hopefully it's becoming more and more normalized, because these are real human abilities and we can't stay stuck in our limitations. So thank you for writing about this and for opening up this world to so many people, including myself. I love this book, and you have a lot of work. You also have done the introduction to a book, the preface of a book. There will be links to all of those books in the show notes for this episode. And as I mentioned, your articles are available online for free to download. And then would you tell us what the future holds as far as your work and where you're going now?
Sure. Well, now I find myself looking at AI and the types of things that are happening with that. I guess I've progressed from media technologies now to AI technologies, and because it's happening at such an exponential rate. So I think something like that. But actually, Laura, I just don't know.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm just, I guess I'm just thinking about what next, and still there's a wake that happened after American Cosmic, and I guess I'm just in that wake, and
okay.
Soon we'll be out. But so I'm not quite sure, let's put it that way, but I think it has to do with AI.
I heard you mention something you told Michael Shermer. You said that we quote Yoda more than Jesus or Shakespeare. I love that. So true, so true. Thank you so much again for all of your time today, Dr. Pasulka. It was such a pleasure to talk with you.
Absolutely. I had a great time. Thanks for inviting me.
Please visit the website speakingofjung, that's JUNG.com, for more information on everything that was discussed in this episode. There you will also find all of the previous episodes of this podcast, which are available to stream or to download for free. This podcast is also available on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, and on Amazon Music, and it will be available later in the week on our YouTube channel, Jungian Laura. You can also listen to this episode on your Amazon Echo device, simply by saying, "Alexa, play Speaking of Jung on Apple Podcasts." Just be sure to pronounce Jung with a hard J. So with special thanks to Mike Cleland, Whitley Strieber, and to Diane Braden, this is Laura London, and you've been listening to a special quarantine edition of Speaking of Jung.
Or